Good morning and welcome to Network 83. So today what we're going to be doing, and I'm going to put this little video together, I'm going to make this publicly available on the internet, but mostly I'm doing this for my students in my CTS 120 class. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today, we're going to take a bare chassis and we're going to turn this thing into a functional computer, and we may actually, depending on what materials I can scrounge up, we may actually turn this into a little bit of a gaming rig. So we'll play around with that and see what happens. Alright, so what I got here is, well, it's a chassis that I got out of the trash pile, to tell you the truth. This thing is stripped down to nothing. But it's a good mid-size ATX chassis. We're going to fix this thing up. We're going to make it look sharp, and we're going to put some hardware in it. And what we're going to be using for a motherboard, because, okay, this is not going to be a state-of-the-art piece of equipment. What we're going to do is we're going to use equipment that we've scrounged up here and there, and we're going to build a functional computer and see how well it works. Now what I've got here is an old Gigabyte motherboard, and it's already got a processor installed on it. I probably should make another video about processor installation, but this is, I think it's an AMD FX chip. I can't 100% remember. But as you can see, it's a little bit on the dusty side. So one of the first things we're going to do is blow some of the dust off this motherboard with the help of a can of compressed air. Oh yeah, oh, look at that. Okay, a little bit dusty, a little bit dirty. This is actually kind of fun. Alright, so we've got most of the dust blown out of that thing. So this is going to be the motherboard that we use. It's already got four gigabyte memory chips in it, but I'll show you guys how to pop those things out and replace them, because we're going to upgrade these. We're going to use some 8 gigabyte memory chips instead. Alright, so I'm going to pause this video and then we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so something else we're going to need for our machine. We need a power supply. Okay, so got this power supply out of the closet. It's an older one. It's only a 430 watt, so please try to keep the laughter to a minimum. I know this is not going to support any kind of high-powered processor or video card, but for our purposes, you know, we're just building a Junkyard Computer here. So this thing ought to work just fine. Now something we do need to do though before we go putting this machine, or I'm sorry, putting this power supply into our case, before we do all that, we want to test it and make sure it actually does work. Now what I have here is a power supply tester. This one happens to be made by Thermaltake. We've been using these things for years and we've had a lot of really good luck with them. Now the way this thing works, it's got several different plugs here, and we'll just start at the top. Okay, in the center here, these 4 pins, that's a standard Molex power connector. And then there's a little blade right here that is a SATA power connector. Okay, and then down here on this end, we've got a CPU power connector, and then this red plug here is your PCIe auxiliary power connector. Alright, and on the other end, this is your standard 24-pin ATX power connector. You don't have to use all 24 pins. If you've got an old power supply that only supports 20 pins, then you can line it up. And these pins have different shapes, so you can't really make a mistake here. It won't. If you start trying to put your plug in here and it's giving you a lot of resistance, check and make sure you've actually got it plugged in the right way, because these things are not, they're not all the same shape, right? And when you get here and you start looking, you'll see that, oh, okay, some of these holes are square and some of them have like beveled edges, right? Okay, so that's going to help you not make mistakes when you go to plug in your device. Now then, let's bring up all these. This looks like Medusa's head, but it's not. It's actually just a lot of cables. Okay, so here goes my 20 plus 4, 24 pins. I'm going to plug that dude in right there. And let's see, what have we got here? This is my PCIe. Now, this particular power supply is not, this isn't a super powerful power supply, so you'll notice that for the CPU plug, right here, CPU plug has 8 pins. You don't have to use all 8, you can just use 4 of them, but it's got 8 total. So I'm going to plug my CPU into here. CPU power goes in here. Alright, PCIe, and like I was telling you guys, PCIe, it's got 8 pins here. This has only got 6, but it won't let you plug it in. There you go, see? It just slides right in. It doesn't give you any resistance. Alright, now got a couple more. Alright, this one has got Molex and SATA. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the farthest distant SATA connection, and oh man, good thing I've got my glasses on, or else I'd never be able to see this. You have to make sure that the metallic contacts are lined up correctly, and then this thing will just plug right in there. There it goes. All right, now this is my last cable, and so I'm going to go to the most far distance Molex connector and plug that dude in like this. Golly. Okay, took a little finagling, because if you've got the SATA and the Molex plugged in at the same time, there's not a whole lot of room left. All right, now let's plug in our power supply. It would be a little comic relief if all of a sudden I got shocked. Okay, so right off the bat, I'm seeing a blue light here. Okay, that's good. All right, so let's check and see what we got. Okay, 24 pin gives us all is blue. Okay, everything's good. Our 5 volt is giving us 5 volts. Our 12 volts giving us 12 volts. Our 3.3 is giving us 3.3. Okay, and let's see, we got another 12 volt here that's 11.2, but that's okay. We're allowed to be off by a volt or so. Our other 5 volts is good, and then our PG is giving us a 305. All right, super. So that's outstanding. Okay, now let's check our other connection. Okay, that was our 24 pin. Okay, our PCI is putting out 12 volts. That's good. I hope you guys can see this. All right, our CPU is kicking out 12 volts. That's what we want. Our SATA connector is giving us 5 volts on the 5 volt line, 12 volts, 3.3. This is a really good power supply. Usually you're going to see some fluctuation here. It'll be like, 11.9 or 12.2, something like that. But these numbers are all right on the money. And yeah, so we're all good. Now the only thing is, okay, there it goes. I was like, what happened to my Molex connector? Okay, well, my Molex connector came loose a little bit. Crud. My Molex connector came loose a lot. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're just going to plug that Molex back in, and I'm sure that it's fine. I don't have any reason to believe. All right, I'm going to pull the SATA and plug in the Molex, because those guys are challenging each other for space here. Okay, got the Molex plugged in. Now let's check our Molex connector. PCI, CPU, Molex. Okay, it's giving me 5 volts on the 5 volt and 11.9 on the 12, which is fine. That's good. And chances are, am I going to use these Molex connectors on this particular build? Maybe. Probably not, though. All right, cool. So our power supply checks out. Super. tools. Okay, I already showed you that tester that you use. Now, this thing you can get off of Amazon or Newegg or pretty much anybody that sells computer parts. These testers for your power supply, about $20, maybe $25. I mean, you can spend a lot of money. You can get a really, really nice one. But this one here, I think is less than $25 if I'm not mistaken. It's called the Dr. Power 2. And this will do 90% of what you need. Like if you're at a customer's shop and you think that their power supply might be giving them problems, you can quickly determine if that really is the issue by just plugging this guy into the power supply and seeing if it's, you know, if there's any problem. This thing's going to light up red, so you'll immediately know that there's an issue, and this will help you track down exactly where that is. Now, toolbox. Again, you know, from pretty much any computer supply place, you can get a decent set of tools for not much money. This is you know, just something that I use here in the lab all the time. It's got a couple of nut drivers. You know, it's got a 1/4 inch, and then I can't remember what size this one is, but it's a little bit smaller, and we're going to use it in just a couple of minutes. We've also got some tweezers here. We've got graspers. Okay, these things are going to be your friend. You push on this little plunger here, and you see these 3 spring-loaded, I guess like jaws, come out, and you can use those to get a grip on like the head of a screw, and then that helps you start, like if you're working in a really tight space. And also if you've dropped a part down in the computer chassis, sometimes you can use this to retrieve it with. Very, very valuable tool. And then let's see, screwdrivers. This one happens to have a Torx driver, a couple different sizes. I think that's T10 and T15. If I'm not mistaken. Sometimes on a chassis, depending on like if it's a Dell or something like that, they may have gotten cute and decided to use Torx instead of regular Phillips screws. So that's something you might wind up needing. And a buddy of mine back in the day that I used to work with whenever I worked for the Department of Transportation, he had a tool set that cost him like a couple $100, and it was really nice, I'll give him that. And I was asking him one day, I said, man, how come you spend all that money on those tools? He said, well, this is my career, you know, and, you know, what is it worth to you to spend money on your career? Okay, good point. All right, so what I wanted to show you guys next, let me just move this stuff off to the side temporarily. Move those tools over there. Okay, so my computer case that we were talking about earlier. Now, this computer case will accommodate an ATX motherboard. It'll also accommodate a micro ATX motherboard. So, as you can see, it'll also accommodate an extended ATX. I don't have one of those to show you. But what you have to do is you have to determine which holes in the chassis that you're going to need to support your motherboard. Okay? And then you install these little brass standoffs. Now, some computer cases that I've seen here recently, they've got the standoffs already installed, or they've got them, you know, they're like built into the chassis, so you don't have to hassle with this part. But this chassis, the metallic backing here is flat, and I can't have my motherboard just laying on this flat piece of metal. That wouldn't be good. So I need these standoffs. Now, this one here is not wanting to go all the way in, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this small nut driver we were talking about, and I'm just going to drive that the rest of the way in. Okay. All right, there it goes. Okay, that's a little bit better. Nice and tight there. All right, so what I did was I took my motherboard and I just kind of put it in just to judge which screw holes I was going to need to use, right? And so now I've got my motherboard in place there, and I've got the standoffs lined up correctly with the motherboard's individual, with these holes here where we're going to mount our motherboard in just a couple of minutes. All right, the other thing I need to do before I go ahead and bolt down the motherboard, the other thing I need to do is install this back plate. Now, every motherboard is going to come with a back plate. If your motherboard doesn't have one, then okay, your setup is not going to look real great. But can you install a motherboard without the back plate? Yes, absolutely. This does a couple things. Number one, it's going to make it look better, and number two, it's going to help your airflow, because this is going to block up all those big gaps that otherwise would be back here at the back of your chassis. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this thing in. You press it in from the back side, and it's just got like some little detents, and you'll feel them click in. And so this thing is not it's not like permanently installed. We're just going to snap it in place, and I think that's got it secure. We're just going to snap it in place, and that way if we ever decide to go back and replace this motherboard, we can get a new motherboard and a new back plate and put it together, and it'll look real professional. Alright, so now I'm going to take my motherboard and put this dude in just like this. Okay, now the back plate has got some, it's got like some metal, almost like springs. So when you put your motherboard in, you'll feel a little bit of resistance from that back plate. That's good. So what you're going to wind up doing is kind of putting a little pressure on the motherboard against that back plate, and then put your screws in place to secure it, right? And that way, you know, that way it's nice and snug up against that back plate. All right, now I am fixing to go and find some screws that I can use to secure this motherboard with, and then I'll be right back. You know those cooking shows where they have all the ingredients laid out, and they have like these little containers on the table, and they'll say, well, you know, we got this much garlic and this much mushrooms, whatever. Okay, I can see now why they get that stuff out in advance, because that saves them a lot of running back and forth. This is just a bunch of rando screws that I happen to have laying around, and so what I'm going to do is try to find some that look like they'll work. And I'm going to take this little pair of graspers like we were talking about earlier and get a hold of that little screw. Okay, and now I'm going to put it down in the motherboard here, and I'm just going to give it a turn to kind of get it started, and then I'm going to release the grasper. Then I'm going to take this number 1 Phillips screwdriver and just kind of tighten that dude down. Okay, so there we go. Oh, you know what? Wait a minute. Let me take this thing out. I'm going to show you guys a trick. Well, it's not really a trick. It's just something I learned the hard way. Okay, now, we're still going to put the motherboard in. That's going to be our next step. But before we put the motherboard in, I'm going to do myself a favor, because I'm old and my fingers are not real. I don't have the hands of a pianist, actually, which would come in handy here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my motherboard. Okay, always keep yourself grounded. Now, I'm doing something bad that I shouldn't be doing. Don't you make my mistake. I'm not using a grounding strap, and I should be. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these little tiny connectors. These are your front panel connectors, and they are super small. And they have to plug in. They have to plug in to these tiny little connectors here, these little posts. Now, these posts are labeled, like it'll tell you it's the hard drive activity light, the reset switch, the power switch. You have to be able to see this, though. It helps if you've got the documentation that went with your motherboard. If you don't, you can just kind of wing it by reading off here. And these connectors, okay, let me grab this one. This one is super tiny. Okay, this is my reset switch. So I'm going to find where on here is my reset switch, and then I'm going to plug this dude in to those two prongs. Okay, there it goes. Right? Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing for all these little guys here. Now, something that you might be wondering, and okay, and this is, believe it or not, this is the computer's speaker. The only thing it's going to do is beep on startup and give me an audible signal about whether or not my memory's messed up or my video card's not right or whatever. Depending on the number of beeps, that can be an error message that means something. Okay. So yeah, oh yeah, what I was going to tell you. Industry standard. Now this isn't 100%, but this is industry standard. Like this is the front side of the motherboard where the power connector is. This is the back side of the motherboard where all your input-output connectors are. The back side of the motherboard is generally, or towards the back side of the motherboard, is where you want to put your positive connectors. So like right here, see how on this wire, if I can get a hold of it, here it goes. Okay, on this wire here we've got a positive and a negative. So whenever I find where this goes, the posts, I'll put the colored wire in the positive and the white wire on the negative. Now for switches, it doesn't really matter that much, but for LEDs, remember LEDs operate on direct current, so if you've got the positive and the negative switched, then your LED just won't work. It won't damage it, I don't think, but it just won't come on. Alright, well it took me a minute. Even though I've got my glasses on, it's still really hard to see. But eventually I got everything hooked up. Okay, so I've got my power switch, my reset switch, my power LED, my hard drive LED. Now we're going to go ahead and finish hooking up the front side connectors. I think we'll just go ahead and do that while I've got this up here and I can demonstrate. And I may need to pull some of these guys out for construction purposes, but for right now I'm just going to show you how it works. Okay, this blue cable right here is USB 3.0. This is your high-speed USB cable on the front side of the chassis. You're going to have a couple of them on the back side of the chassis too, but this is for front side for, you know, just your convenience basically. Okay, now we've got another connector here. This is your front side USB. Now in my case, I've only got one USB 2 port on the front side, so this is the only connector like this I've got. And this is one of those that if you try to put it in and it doesn't go, then double check, because as you can see it's got 5 pins across this side, and then it's got 4 pins across this side, and then it's got a block right here. So you want to make sure that that plastic block lines up with the gap over here where there's not a pin, and then we just plug that dude right in there. Ta-da! Okay, now we've also got, and I don't have any real sound, or I usually don't use headphones or anything with my computer here, but I could if I wanted to. But this is your audio connector. Okay, your audio connector has got the same sort of arrangement. It's got 5 pins across the side here, and then it's got 4 pins across the back side, but you'll notice where it's blocked out is different. Okay, so right here is your front side audio, and so we're just going to plug that guy in just like that. And again, you can't really make a mistake here, because if you start plugging it in backwards, it won't let you do it. Okay, now then, I think we've got all of our front side connectors squared away. So what I'm going to do now is just start putting these screws in. I'm going to put this motherboard in place, and I'm going to start putting these screws in. But except for I think I'm going to put the power supply in also. Let me just make sure that my power supply, when it goes in, is not going to interfere with my motherboard installation. And Okay, power supply is going to fit right here. It's got like a shelf here and a shelf here, and your setup may be slightly different, but okay, so I've got my power supply in, got my motherboard in. They're not in each other's way. Now I can go ahead and secure these guys. Now your power supply, as long as we're here and we're talking about it, oops, your power supply uses 4 hex nuts or Phillips screws, depending on your setup, you know, whatever you've got. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little Phillips screw here, and I'm going to go ahead and put a screw in my power supply just so that I can, you know, get it to kind of hold where it's supposed to be. So it's not flopping around. But I'm not going to finish securing my power supply just yet. I'm just going to put that one screw in, and I'm going to leave that like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and start putting in the mounting screws for my motherboard. And I know probably somebody is going to put in the comments, you know, oh, you messed it all up. Yeah, probably. But I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time. I think I started building computers back in, well, let me tell you a little bit about my history. I got my first computer in 1986, and it was a Zenith 8088. It was an IBM compatible, and that thing only came with 256K of memory. And when I say 256K, I don't mean 256 megabytes of RAM. It came with 256 kilobytes of RAM. And one of my hobbies at that time was copying software, copying disks from one disk to another. And the disks I was using were 360K. And so you can imagine my problem. I had a 360K disk, but I only had 256K of memory, which meant that you know, I couldn't just copy a whole floppy disk in one fell swoop. I would have to just you know, copy part of it and then take the floppy out, put the floppy back in, and finish copying the rest. Well, I upgraded my computer. I upgraded my computer's memory to 512K, and I had to insert the integrated circuit memory chips by hand, one at a time. And I don't know, I just kind of became fascinated with the whole idea of taking existing hardware and upgrading it and making it better. Kind of like Steve Austin, you know? Better, stronger, faster. And then later on, got a couple of gigs working as a computer programmer. And also, you know, in addition to being a computer programmer, at my very first job, I was also the IT support person, and we had IBM PC-ATs, which were gigantic cases. And those things were extremely expandable. You know, I can't remember how many expansion slots were on the AT motherboard, but it was considerable. And the cases were ginormous. All right, going to take a little break here. Be right back. Well, we're getting there. We're making progress. Okay, so now I've got my motherboard. I went ahead and tightened it down. Now, you don't have to crush down on these screws. Remember, these aren't really load bearing. You just don't want your stuff shifting around inside the case whenever you move it. So, you know, so the motherboard needs to be secure, yes, but you know, don't crank down on those screws, because if somebody comes along after you and has to work on this thing, they're going to be cursing your name. Okay, now, got a hard drive here. Now, this is not a traditional hard drive. This is an SSD, solid state drive, just a generic one that I got off of Amazon. Now, This chassis does not have any provision for mounting a 2.5-inch drive. These are very common in laptops, but until recently they were very uncommon in desktops. You know, just wasn't a thing. Most modern, like if you're using a brand new chassis for your build, then it's going to have a slot or two for SSD drives already built in, so you won't have to do this next part. What I'm going to have to do is put a 2.5-inch drive into a 3.5-inch bay, because all I have here is 3.5-inch and 5.25-inch. So in order to make this thing fit, I've got this little $10 mounting adapter. So what I'm going to do, and it's got places here for screw holes that made up exactly with your SSD drive. And so what you're going to wind up doing is putting your SSD drive in here. It might take a little bit of finagling, but eventually it will go. All right, and you've got 4 tiny little screws. And I'm probably going to drop these. So in order to make sure I don't, I'm going to break out the graspers again and get a hold of that screw, just like that. And then I'm going to start threading it in right there. Okay, just going to give it a couple turns just to get it started. Okay, then I'll let go of it, and then I'll take my little Phillips and just drive that thing down. Again, finger tight. You know, as soon as it starts to give you some resistance, that's all you need. Okay, and I'm going to do that for the other 3, and then I will have something that I can mount into one of these 3.5-inch slots. See, it'll fit just like this, and it'll be held nice and snug. See, right there it goes. And then I'll put 1 or 2 screws here to secure it, and that's going to be all I need, you know, as far as my hard drive mounting goes. Something you may or may not want to include in your build is a compact disc or a DVD drive. I'm going to put one in this machine. Not that I think I'm going to have a burning need for CD access or DVD access. Although, you know, if you like to watch movies on your desktop, then, you know, this might be a good idea. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this guy in here. Reason being, I've got 3 5.25-inch drive bays and really not much to do with them. You know, so I might as well just put a DVD player in here. And again, you know, my DVD player is just going to slide directly into the 5.25-inch drive bay, and I'm going to secure it with a couple of screws here. And this CD drive or DVD drive, whatever it is, I don't know, I just grabbed it out of the box in the closet, and I'm imagining it's a DVD drive because most of them are nowadays. And I'm just going to secure it with a couple screws, you know, so that it's not sliding around in here too much. And okay, so I don't know if you guys, yeah, there it goes. That's the LG DVD drive. Okay, so now we've got a DVD drive. We've also got a couple holes here. I'm going to have to find some covers to go over these so that our build looks clean. Okay, now then, I went ahead and bolted in the SSD drive like we were talking about. I just secured it with a couple screws, and it's wedged in there pretty tight actually. Something that I'm not doing with this build that I usually do, normally whenever I'm putting a computer together, I'll put in like 3 or 4 or even 5 exhaust fans. I usually have like 2 or 3, usually 2 blowing in to the front of the case, and then 3 blowing out the back or the top, or a combination of those, because modern processors, especially if you're running like an AMD Threadripper or Ryzen 9 or Intel You know, the i7s and up, some of those can generate heat. And especially if you're running a high-powered graphics card, then heat might wind up being an issue in your chassis. You're going to need some way to vent that out. In this case, I don't think heat's going to be an issue. If it turns out that it is later on, then I've got a couple places here that I can put auxiliary fans. I've got a place in the front for a 4-inch fan, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't have any exhaust fans in my hand right this minute. But yeah, that's something that we may do in the future, is put some fans in here to kind of give us a little bit better airflow. But for the time being, what I'm going to do is start connecting up some of these power cords. Now, let me see. Is this my PCI or my CPU? That's my CPU. Okay, now this is an 8-pin CPU connector, which you will need if you have a fairly powerful central processing unit. I do not have a powerful central processing unit, so the only thing I'm going to do is just use half of this. My connector is only a 4-pin, and right back here at the back it is. And so yeah, I think I've got that thing oriented correctly. I have a coworker that says orientated, and I don't have the heart to tell her there's no such word. Excuse me. Alright, so we've got our CPU power. Now, okay, these cables have got wire loom on them. That's a help. You know, it makes it look a lot nicer, that's for sure. And also, something that you might wind up having a problem with is if you have too many cables back here that are just loose, sometimes they can wind up getting hung up in your CPU fan or in one of your exhaust fans, and at best, making a lot of noise. You know, sounds like a playing card in the spokes. But the other thing is they can actually stop that fan from turning, and if that fan stops turning, then your processor can overheat relatively quickly, and hopefully your motherboard has got a built-in safety sensor, and so whenever that CPU starts getting too hot, it will automatically shut you down. Hopefully. The other case is that the CPU, it does not have such a sensor, and the CPU just runs hot until it gets so hot that it damages the circuitry. And then once the CPU is damaged, you know, as you know, there's no way to fix it. You're going to have to go back and buy a brand new one. Okay, so now I've got my main power connected. I've got my CPU power connected. I'm going to use one of these SATA power connectors to run power to my SSD drive. Okay, so now that guy's plugged in. And what I'm going to do with these excess power cables, I'm just going to tuck them back in here, okay, so that they're kind of out of my way. There we go. And I think this is the PCIe. It is. I don't need the PCIe for the time being. Maybe later. Okay, now the other device that I have that needs power is my CD drive. And so I'm going to use this SATA connector here to power my CD drive. Okay, so right there it is. Now SATA drives have two connectors, one for power and one for data. So I'm going to need to fetch some data cables so that I can hook up these drives. But in the meantime, I've got this thing here, video card. Now this is an older one. This is a Radeon RX 550. Okay, so this is not anything to write home about. I mean, it's a decent video card, but it takes up a little bit of extra space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove another one of these filler plates back here. And most modern chassis come with these breakaway plates that you just snap them out as needed. But it always pays to have a few of these things here on hand, you know, so that you can stopper up any gaps in the back of your chassis. Alright, so I'm going to plug this guy in. Now this is an older video card, so it doesn't need like an extra PCIe power supply. It just uses the voltage off the PCIe bus. Man, this is a long screw. that does not look like it came from a computer toolkit. As a matter of fact, yeah, the heck with this. I'm not going to use that big old screw. I'm going to go get like a for real one. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, got a little bit more reasonable sized screw here. Alright, so now I'm going to secure this video card down. Video killed the radio star. Okay, now, got that thing in. There's a clip down here at the bottom that holds that PCIe card in place. Make sure that thing's engaged. Alright, so we're good to go from that standpoint. So now we got a video card, we got a hard drive, we got a DVD drive, we got our processor, we got our power supply, we got our memory. I think that we are about ready to plug this dude in and test fire it for the first time. See here, it's starting to actually look like a computer now that we got some parts in it. Alright, so give me a minute. I got to go round up a couple of SATA cables, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Couple of generic SATA cables that were in the closet. Okay, see, I work at an institute of higher learning, and I work in a computer lab, and so we have all kinds of stuff available, you know, from when we've done builds and teardowns. And you know, when you tear down a PC, you know, you can salvage some of the material out of it usually. And so that all winds up back there in our storage closet. And then we buy like new computers, and sometimes a new computer will come with new SATA cables, and then we wind up reusing the old SATA cables. Okay, now SATA ports. Let me see what we've got going on here. Okay, SATA, what I'm looking for is SATA 0, and I believe, yep, here it goes. Okay, lower left-hand corner, there are 6 SATA ports, and so I want to use SATAs 0 and 1, and there's no real reason for that, just my own conceit. So I'm going to plug the DVD drive into SATA 1, and I'm going to plug my SSD drive. Oh, if you're looking at these SATA cables, let me see if I can bring this over here so you can see it a little bit better. See how the SATA cable has like a little keyway here at the end? Okay, this is so that you can only connect this SATA connector in one direction. Okay, so if you look at the SATA connector, and it's got a matching keyway, it's kind of like an L shape, and you plug this dude in just like that, and just like that. Okay, these are not the greatest quality SATA cables in the world. If you're buying SATA cables off of Amazon or whatever, try to get the ones with the metal clips. They're a little bit better quality usually, and definitely a little bit more secure. Okay, so we're ready to test fire this device. So let me clean up my workspace a little bit, and we'll crank this guy and see what happens. Okay, so our Junkyard Computer is up and running, and as you can see, all right, this is the front side of the chassis, and we have our LEDs plugged in and they're working. I had a big old hideous hole right here. The only thing I could find to plug the hole with was some old, those are removable hard drive bays that are defunct. You know, they don't work anymore, but I guess nobody had the heart to throw them away. Lucky for us, because I was able to use them to kind of dress up the front of our computer a little bit. And over here, you know, this is our handiwork. I thought we did pretty good. Okay, thank goodness the CPU fan still worked, because I don't know if I had one around here that I could substitute for that. And I'm thinking that I'm going to try to find a couple of small fans to go in this back here, you know, just to give us a little bit more ventilation. And over here is our side panel. So we go ahead and put our side panel on. Well, if I can get it to fit, there it goes. Okay, so it's a little bent and a little rusty. but it's on there. Okay, so there we go. Junkyard Computer that runs, and the hard drive that I used, the SSD drive, came out of another computer that happened to be an MSI. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go in here and I'm going to go to the Gigabyte website. Let's see. All right, I'm going to close this out. Close that out. Okay, so my motherboard. My motherboard's a Gigabyte 970A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on driver download, and I'm going to see if I can download a driver for this thing, you know, and bring it, you know, because right now it's got the MSI chipset drivers, which, you know, that's not ideal. So I'm going to load the latest version of the Gigabyte chipset, or the AMD chipset, I guess is what it really is. And hopefully, once I get that done, then this thing's going to run like a champ. So yeah, there it is. Our Junker computer lives. All right, thanks very much. I hope this has been at least somewhat helpful. So in case you decide to do a build, you know, you don't necessarily have to go out and buy the latest, greatest. You might be able to use stuff that's laying around and, you know, build yourself a computer. Maybe you just need to buy a few extra parts here and there, so you might be able to build something on the cheap that will work. All right, whenever we benchmark this thing, I'll show you guys what the bench looks like. But until then, thanks very much, and have a great day, and good luck with your build. I hope it goes really well.